We have come to the most important Sunday in the church year, Easter, the feast of the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. And it will be the day in which we will probably have more people sitting before the pulpit than we do on any other day. I came across the church newsletter from my last year as a pastor in Trinity of Rockville, Connecticut. And we had 250 people in church on Easter. We generally averaged about 150 people in church. Now, looking back, I didn't think we were a particularly large church, but in looking back on my days there, I didn't realize that in comparison to what pastors have to encounter today, that was rather unusual today. Attendances at a church, many of our churches, and maybe yours too, very rarely hit the 100 mark. This may be a Sunday when it will hit the 100 mark. And of course, for those who have larger congregations, you'll have even more. What this means is that we have to get right to the topic of what Easter is all about. I do not think that a pleasant introduction from an example from literature or a sermon illustration into the sermon has any value at all. Simply, we have to be upfront. We have to be absolutely clear, simply because many of the people who are there won't be there again. Now, we cannot put ourselves into the situation that knowing that a lot of people there really are not there because they believe it, but because it's customary, that we get angry about that. I don't think that doesn't perform one thing at all. We just have to realize that who they are. Now, if we're going to address these people, and I don't expect there's going to be any immediate conversions, but we have to do it anyway. We have to be clear and concise so that they know the argument. So we will go at Matthew chapter 1, Matthew chapter 28. To what verse do we go? 1 to 10. Matthew 28, 1 to 10. That ought to be easy to handle. Now it says here, when the Sabbath had gone its way, when it was Sabbath, at the dawning of the first of the Sabbath, came Mary Magdalene and the other Mary to the tomb. Now the one persistent witness of the death of Jesus and his resurrection is Mary the Magdalene, to see the tomb. Now you will notice the word here for seeing the tomb is theoresai, to observe the tomb. It wasn't just a casual scene. They were intent on what they were going to see. Now, Matthew interrupts his Easter story with a bit of apocalyptic material. It says here that there was an earthquake a seismos, as in seismograph, and it was great. And the messenger of the Lord, katabino, which means to come out of the realm of God, came out of the heaven, not the heavens. This is the word heaven, on earth as it is in heaven. And coming, shoved the stone and sat upon it. And his appearance was a starlight, and his clothing, endema, was white as snow. And from fear, phobou, the keepers, the guards or the soldiers, here's the same word for earthquake, they suffered something within themselves. You see the word seismograph right here? Size right there. It's the same word that appears over here. Seismos estheizon, the keepers, and they were as dead. Now this section here could really be removed. Verses 2, 3, and 4 could be removed because they form a unit in itself of something that does not involve the women coming to the tomb. So the women come to the tomb, and then the writer gets off on another tangent. And the angel does not only speak to the women after we have a description of these other events, which may be described as apocalyptic events, events concerning what will take place at the last time. And here the point, I think, can be made in the sermon that it should be preached as if Easter is the last day. Good Friday and Easter are presented by the evangelist as the coming of the judgment of God on the world. We didn't go into this in regard to the Matthew's account of the crucifixion, but there also is an earthquake, and the dead are raised, and we are told that after the resurrection, they go into the holy city, which I would take it they go into a higher glory. Now comes the question: is the earthquake that appears in the resurrection story the same earthquake that is referred to in the crucifixion story? Because in the crucifixion story it says that when the dead are raised, they go into the holy city after Jesus' resurrection. So that would fit there. And the purpose of the use of the reference to the earthquake is that the day of judgment is coming, and God is holding all people accountable. And it was Rudolf Bultmann who said that the Transfiguration was a misplaced Easter account. Well, yes, maybe no. What is so strange about the account of the resurrection in all four Gospels, including Matthew, is just Jesus appears as ordinary. And there's nothing striking about his appearance. Now, this is not the humiliation or the homo factus est that we speak about in dogmatics and in theology, but he is restraining his glory. He does not appear in glory in his resurrection to his disciples, because they don't exactly know what to do with it. Now, we do not want to make an Easter sermon a caustic or belligerent sermon. But I think it has to be said that the evangelist Matthew, in distinction from the other writers, make it the day of judgment. This is the day on which you'd better decide on what you are going to do about Jesus. Because just by itself, the coming back to life of a dead man is phenomenal. At least I've been involved in this kind of a case, and you've been involved in this kind of cases too, where people have got confused and said that the wrong person had died. Then when you find out that the person who was supposed to be dead really didn't die at all, and you see this person, it throws you for a loop. Now, this would be the same thing with the resurrection of Jesus. It is the event that changes all of history, and I think it has to be said right at the beginning of the sermon in such a way as that all the hearers get the message. This is not a time to use rhetorical devices. This is not a time to be cute. It's not a time to indicate how erudite we are in knowing what kind of literature which we have. And it's not even a time to say that Jesus is my Savior. This is an unusual event that God has raised a man from the dead, and by that he has endorsed everything which that man taught, and that man is Jesus. Now, to look at the phenomenal basis for this particular thing, first of all, there's the earthquake. It's either the second earthquake or the second of the same earthquake that took place at the crucifixion. This releases the angel of the Lord. Now, typically in the Old Testament, we consider the angel of the Lord to be the pre-incarnate Christ. Of course, there's many reasons for saying that this could hardly be the case, but it does indicate the angel of the Lord goes before Israel through the Red Sea, and in the 40 years of wilderness leads them. So God is involved in this. Katabino is the technical term, kanabano, for coming out of the divine realm into the earthly realm. And he pushes away the stone. This is the only gospel that says this. The messenger pushes away the stone, and he sits on it. Now, this is something which I have not fully grasped. What is the meaning that he sits on the stone? This indicates the angel himself is carrying out judgment. He has come as the teacher. And here his appearance is as starlight. Now, there are two things here. First, a reference to his appearance, and the second to his clothing. The reference to his appearance was a starlight. It resembles the transfiguration scene in Luke, and that his clothing is as white as snow. That almost sounds like the book of Revelation, where his eyes are like white as snow. This is the coming of judgment on the world. Then we have an intervening element here, and that is, what about the keepers of the tomb? It's frequently said, more than we'd like, that the resurrected Jesus, or that the resurrection has only to do with believers, and therefore it's an hallucination that the early first Christians had. It's a hallucination. Not really true, because the first ones who become aware of that Jesus has been raised from the dead are the enemies of Jesus. Now, this pericope does not go down to it, but from 11 to 14, they go into Jerusalem and they tell the high priests what has happened, and then they are paid off. And so we have to address this, because it's a common belief that the resurrection is simply an act of faith of the followers of Jesus, which it is not. It is something which is in concrete. But the language here is very similar to the language that is used in the transfiguration of glorification of Jesus. The angel then speaks to the women, "Do not fear, I know you seek Jesus, the crucified. He is not here, he is risen, just as he said." Now, if you'll go back to chapter 27, on the Saturday, the intervening day between Good Friday and Easter, the enemies of Jesus want to prevent that the message they were afraid that the disciples would invent the story of the resurrection, and that Jesus had been raised from the dead. And this is picked up here now. There is a connection. Many people don't come to church on Good Friday or Holy Week or Ash Wednesday or any time during Lent, because they have to face either their own sin or they have to face the death of a man who has been crucified. It's not very nice. Notice the prominence of the concept of crucifixion in the Easter story. You seek Jesus, the one who has been crucified. He remains the crucified one. This is not past tense, but it's a present tense. It's the same Jesus who was Jesus who was raised from the dead is the same one who has been crucified. And this is the point. What's the first evidence of the crucifixion? He's not here. There is total agreement that the body of Jesus has not been found. Now, whether you want to go this, there are cases where people have been who have been found guilty of murder when the body has not been found. But it really would help if the body would be found. Now, if Jesus is not be raised, you have to raise the question, where is the body? And none of the followers of, the disciples stole it, the women stole it, who knows what, who knows what. In fact, there's Dominic Crison has hypothesized that dogs came and ate the body of Jesus. Anything to do, of course, there's no evidence for that at all. And the issue that everyone has to agree with, uk estin hoda. That's the message. Before you can say he is risen from the dead, you have to say, not he is here. He is not here. Then where is he? And of course, the message of the church, he is risen from the dead. And some people accept that, but it doesn't affect their lives. And there are other people who deny the resurrection entirely. He rose just as he said. This is the endorsement of the entire Christian religion right here. Not only because he said he was going to be raised from the dead, but this authenticates everything else that he said. Then the thought of he is not here is repeated here. Take a look, see the place where he laid. And then Matthew, by the way, is the most organized of all the Gospels, almost catechetical in presenting his material. You are to go tell his disciples, here's the phrase. Many pastors do this. Jesus Christ is risen from the dead, and the congregation, he is risen indeed. Here's the phrase, egerithe apa ton nekron. He is raised from the dead, and that's the phrase that is founded in the creed. This is what the church says every Sunday. We're very fortunate that our churches use the creed, because this is confessed every single Sunday. He is raised from the dead. And they are to tell the disciples. They are to tell the disciples that he goes before you into Galilee. Now, just how this will fit into any type of sermon, I guess, is up to you. But there is no reference in the Gospel of Matthew that the disciples see Jesus in Jerusalem. None at all. And this and you're to tell them that they are to proceed into Galilee. This is not incidental material, that they are to proceed into Galilee. And there you will see him. Galilee is very important. A number of years ago, I came across a rather significant tome with lectures on Galilee in the ancient world. It had no reference to Christianity or Jesus or anything like that. And Galilee was a place where you could almost call Galilee the armpit of the world, of the earth. It was a mixture of people. The climate wasn't all that great. And in the beginning of the gospel, it says he went to Galilee. Thus was fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet, that Galilee of the people who in darkness sat have seen a great light. That the reason that Galilee is chosen, simply because there is an interracial mixture up in Galilee, and this would be the beginning where God would restore the 12 tribes. In fact, it says that Jesus came and dwelt in Nazareth to fulfill the words of the prophet, land of Zebulun, land of Naphtali, way of the sea, around the Jordan, Galilee of the pagans. The people who in darkness sat have seen a great light. They are the 10 tribes. Those are the people who were the most contemptible. They were the ones who went after false gods. And they were taken into captivity. Now God is restoring Israel. He's restoring church as Israel by beginning in Galilee. And so go tell that they ought to get to Galilee. Now there's a lot of material here that can be used in a very easy way for preaching. Now Jesus appears. So you got 2 appearances in and around the tomb. First, the angel of the Lord. And then comes, Jesus says, he gives them a greeting. How are you? They grabbed his feet. Now, in the ancient world, when you worshipped a statue, you grabbed his feet. Now, this is very unlike Mary Magdalene grasping Jesus in the Gospel of John, which Jesus says she shouldn't be doing that. This is an act of worship, and that this is an act of worship is confirmed by the word proskuneo, which means to worship. This is the word that is used in the temptation of Jesus by Satan. Fall down and worship, and I will give you all of these things. It's the term by the wise men. Now, in some commentaries that you may or may not be using, they say it only indicates reverence to a divine being. No, it's more than that. It's recognizing that the person to whom you are proskuneoing, worshiping, is himself God divine. This indicates the deity of Jesus. And I love these phrases here. Go tell your disciples. I have to get this. Oh, yes. Go tell not my disciples, but my brothers. That's a beautiful phrase. An absolutely beautiful phrase. Because the last people who wanted to see, and I think it can be brought up in a sermon, the last people who wanted to see Jesus raised from the dead were his disciples. After all, they had all deserted. Let's not pick on the person of Peter, who denied he even knew Jesus. They all fled. Kill the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. They all fled, not one. And if we have gotten ourselves into a situation where we have hurt somebody's feelings, deliberately or not so, the last person we want to see is the person we've offended. We don't want to see that person. But right here, this is, in one word, both absolution and the establishment of the ministry. Now they are coming as brothers. The background for this particular pericope is Joseph's brothers. Those are the brothers who sold sold Joseph into slavery, who put him in a pit, hoping that he would die when they could make money on him. They sold him to the Ishmaelites as a slave, and he was the one who, when his life perhaps is the most Christological life in the Old Testament in what he endured, and at the end he is exalted at the right hand of the Pharaoh. Here, go tell my brothers that I go. There is no reference here that Jesus wanted them to confess their sins. It was simply all over. And I think this could be a reference in a sermon, that regardless of who hears this message, God accepts them as they are. And also, now these disciples are put on the same level as Jesus, and they're in Galilee. It doesn't say that they are to go to the tomb. They are to go to the tomb. It says they are to go to Galilee and get down to business. The next verses, which are not part of the pericope, which is 11 to 15, but certainly would be very beneficial in a Bible class, is that now Matthew gets back to the nitty-gritty of the church and the world in which the church is, and that is the people will pay money to cover up the fact. Well, I wish you all the best on the Easter day, and I'll be with you in one way or another, so thank you very much.